Thank you for joining the third annual Spring Financial Aid webinar series. This series is brought to you by the Northern California College Promise Coalition, or NCCPC for short. NCCPC is a collective impact coalition with over 40 members serving over 150,000 students across 12 Northern California counties. Our geographic footprint includes the 9 Bay Area counties, Sacramento, San Joaquin, and Tulare counties. We bring over 200 leaders together through committees, convenings, and working groups around 4 key pillars. Number 1, advancing public policy. Number 2, building campus partnerships. Number 3, scaling workforce pipelines. And number 4, convening communities of practice. Our members are locally and nationally recognized college access and success programs, advocacy organizations, college and neighborhood promise programs, K-12 and charter school districts, education technology nonprofits, individual advocates, and cities and mayors. We believe that working together, we can impact systemic change on behalf of all of the students we serve and beyond.
Nadja has worked in the college access and persistence field for a decade, with 8 of those years focused on scholarship and affordability. Nadja runs the scholarship program at College Track, a national education nonprofit organization that supports first-generation and low-income students to move to and through college. During our presentation today, we'll be using Padlet, which we've already dropped in the chat for our Q&A. You can heart a question you already see to upvote that question for the speakers, and we'll drop the link in just a moment. And now we'll turn it over to our speaker to share their screen and introduce today's topic. Over to you, Nadja.
Thank you. Can everybody see my screen? Can I get a little thumbs up? Okay, great. Thanks, Mayor. So we are going to be talking about scholarship displacement today. What is it and why does it happen? This is an updated guide with some exciting updates for 2023. And thank you so much for joining. My name is Nadja Jepsen, she, her, hers. I am the Senior Financial Programs and Scholarship Director at College Track. I've been there for almost 8 years next month, and I've been in the education equity space for over a decade. College Track is an education nonprofit, and we operate out of California, Colorado, Louisiana, Maryland, and Washington, D.C. So I have worked with financial aid offices across over 100 institutions in the US and some abroad. I frequently present on scholarship displacement. I have another presentation on the same topic with the University of Wisconsin-Madison for the National Scholarship Providers Association later this month. I've also published articles about this topic in Inside Higher Ed, EdSource, Teen Life. I'm an advocate member of the Northern California College Promise Coalition, and I was a scholarship recipient that was impacted by displacement policy. So what is scholarship displacement? This is also known as award displacement or financial aid displacement, and it's when one form of financial aid, like a university grant, is reduced or canceled because the student won another form of financial aid, like an outside scholarship. I'm using the definition from the NSPA. I want to make sure that we are all on the same page about what different types of scholarships we're talking about today. So there are 2 main types of scholarships. There are merit scholarships and there are need-based scholarships. A merit scholarship is usually based on an achievement or an interest. So you might see scholarships that require students to have a certain GPA or there might be scholarships based on the major the student is in. So something you might see a lot is a STEM scholarship. There also can be participation in extracurricular activities like a lacrosse scholarship. Sometimes this will include demographics that pertain to gender, race, or affiliations with certain countries. And merit scholarships generally are not supposed to be impacted by the student's financial situation. Then we have need-based scholarships, and these are the vast majority of scholarships that we see, and they are based on the student's financial need. This is determined by the FAFSA, the California DREAM Act, and the student's expected family contribution. These numbers are determined by the U.S. Department of Education. So when you have a need-based scholarship, a student is usually going to be required to provide some sort of documentation, like the FAFSA, the student aid report, tax documents, something official that shows the student's financial situation. Some need-based scholarships require that a student is a Pell recipient, and they also may require additional documentation, such as if a student has another outside scholarship, they might be required to provide that information. And one thing that is an important takeaway that I want people to have today is that most, if not all, university grants are tied to need, even ones that are maybe presented as a merit scholarship, so something that would require a student to have a certain GPA at the university, there still is this tied to need, and I'm going to talk about that more in future slides. My experience with scholarship displacement started with graduate school. I was looking for an affordable option, and because of how expensive higher education is in the US, it was actually cheaper for me to be an international student in England, which is one of the most expensive countries in the world, than for me to go to a local California State University and live at home. But I still wanted to apply for scholarships, and I ended up going to the University of Brighton in Brighton, England, and there were about 2 scholarships that the university provided that I was eligible to apply for. I applied for the more generous one first, and I almost immediately got the scholarship. And I was really surprised because in the US, graduate scholarships are few and far between and very competitive. But I thought, well, if I got this scholarship, maybe I will get the other one as well. And I started getting really excited and thinking that maybe I would get a full ride. But then I actually read the entire email, and it stipulated that the outside scholarship policy at Brighton was that I could only have 1 scholarship. This was reiterated twice in writing to me and also on the phone with the scholarship coordinator. And I remember being bummed out, but one thing that I didn't realize that was unique about my experience is that this information was all presented to me months before I started my program. I actually hadn't even officially decided which program I was going to go to. And so I had time to decide if Brighton was still going to be a good financial fit for me, even though I could only have 1 scholarship. What is very different how a lot of American students experience scholarship displacement is that this information is not readily available on financial aid websites. This information does not usually come on financial aid award letters. Schools are getting better about that, but it's something that can be quite confusing. And a lot of times, and my personal experience being a scholarship person in the US is that our students are not finding out until they have already committed to a school that they get a scholarship displaced. So fast forward into when I am working as a scholarship coordinator after grad school, we had just finished our big scholarship. We had sent out the checks. Us and the students were kind of just starting to have a sigh of relief when we started getting phone calls, and the students were telling me that they had had their university grants canceled or reduced specifically because of the scholarship we had sent. And I remember thinking that that must be a misunderstanding or a mistake, and just a quick call to the financial aid office could sort that out. And I'm sure there's a lot of people on this call today that had a similar thing happen, where you call the financial aid office and it's not a mistake, it's not a misunderstanding, it's scholarship displacement happening. So why do colleges displace aid? There are multiple reasons that this happens. One of them is that there's limited resources at a college, and they may want to give as much money to as many students as possible. And when they find out a student has additional scholarships, they think, well, that money that we wanted to give to them, we can give to another more needy student. There also can be contrasting policies between colleges and scholarship providers. So scholarship providers may create a policy for their students, and they won't even necessarily know what college a student is ultimately going to go to. And so there might be parameters in which they've set up a scholarship that does not align with how the school will be administering their financial aid and their Title IV funding. Scholarships can also be taxable. I'm going to go through some visuals on this in the next few slides, but many people don't know that the IRS looks at certain parts of the cost of attendance as taxable and some of it as non-taxable. And this can also impact how a scholarship can get displaced. Universities that are accredited, most if not all of them, have Title IV funding, and they have rules and regulations that they must follow around Title IV and over awarding a student. So here we're looking at the cost of attendance. We have tuition and fees, room and board, books and supplies, transportation, required materials, personal expenses, and a personal laptop. The IRS has drawn a line in the sand, and there are certain items on this list that are considered tax-free. So books and supplies, tuition and fees, and required materials. While room and board, transportation, and personal expenses are all considered taxable by the IRS. The laptop can be in a little bit of a gray area. So if a college requires students to have a laptop while they go to the college, it sort of magically becomes non-taxable. So if it says this anywhere on the official college website or in the official syllabus, then it is not considered taxable. This is another very important takeaway that I want people to have today, is the difference between cost and need. And this is what we look at, this is what financial aid offices look at, and this is how we have to start thinking about students' financial situation and how that impacts their ability to get displaced or not. So cost is the cost of attendance, and need is the cost of attendance minus the expected family contribution. After a financial aid office looks at these two official numbers, then they have a number of how much need-based aid a student can get. Over award is when a student has more money than their financial need coming in, and colleges that have Title IV funding are not allowed to award above their need. This can be really, really confusing because a student might still have a financial gap. That means they might still have money that they owe towards their cost of attendance, but they're no longer able to receive aid past their need. So I wanted a visual to kind of go over what I just said, but we're going to look at these two students here. The cost of attendance, let's just say they're at the same college, and the cost of attendance is $20,000. It's a lot higher than that normally, but I'm just using it as an example. So student A has an EFC of 0, and student B has an EFC of 3,500. Student A can receive need-based aid up to the full cost of attendance because their EFC is 0, while student B can only receive 16,500 because their EFC is 3,500. Need-based aid administered by the university cannot cover the expected family contribution. This is a really important takeaway today, because a lot of people are focused on that cost of attendance, which makes sense because that is how much it costs to go to the school, but they really need to understand the need and how that can impact the aid they can get. So this is one way that scholarships can get displaced, and it's something that I think is more of an easy fix, is that if there is a scholarship provider who limits or earmarks what their scholarship can cover, the most common one that we see is a scholarship provider may have a scholarship that can only cover tuition and fees. So we're going to look back at student A. So student A has a cost of attendance of $20,000. They have a 0 EFC, so they need that full $20,000. But the tuition and fees is only $10,000 of that full cost of attendance. If student A wins multiple outside scholarships, and maybe even an institutional one that can only be covered, that can only cover tuition and fees, the financial aid office cannot accept over $10,000 if each one of those is earmarked for tuition and fees. So a student could still have that gap of that additional $10,000, but if all of the scholarships are saying it can only be spent on this, that can be another situation that can cause a scholarship to get displaced. So I'm using the example here. Let's say student A won $16,000 of scholarships and all of them can only be spent on tuition and fees. That means the financial aid office would have to displace that $6,000, even though the student would still have this unmet need of $10,000. So Title IV aid, you've heard me talk about this a few times. Most, if not all, accredited universities that have federal funding have Title IV. So this is the federal student aid established by the Higher Education Act of 1965. And students may only receive Title IV funding to the extent that they show financial need. So I've talked about this on other slides, but I really want this to go all the way home, is that the cost of attendance minus expected family contribution is financial need. This is a really important distinction for people to make when they're looking at aid from the university to determine if it is need-based aid or merit aid. And again, like I said, even if it is kind of shown as being merit aid, it likely is still tied to Title IV and need-based. So if you're not sure what counts as this federal Title IV funding, it can be, but not limited to, the federal Pell Grant, the federal direct loans, FSEOG, federal Perkins loan, and federal work study. And again, colleges cannot over-award when they are packaging a student with Title IV. So sometimes what happens is if a school does not know about an outside scholarship, they might package a student as if there is no additional outside money coming. And then when they find out after the fact that the scholarship comes through, that is when we see situations where they start shifting the initial financial aid package. These are some other policies that you should look out for and kind of talk with your students about. So the first one we see, it's called front loading or freshman year only. This is what I see sometimes with our students, where they get a much more generous financial aid award letter their freshman year. This can be kind of a recruitment tactic by colleges, and then they offer less aid in subsequent years. One thing that a student should do, and I'll talk about this on a future slide, is that they should ask directly if it's a renewable scholarship or not, because these can be really misleading and then be really pleasantly a big unpleasant surprise their sophomore year when all of a sudden they're getting less money. The other one, this is kind of like your typical renewable scholarship. We would say flat rate, stagnant, or a consistent award. And an example of this is a student who, let's say, was awarded $5,000 for to get every year of college. That $5,000, let's say that's covering 10% of their cost of attendance their first year. Well, as the cost of attendance continues to go up and inflation continues to go up, so price of groceries, price of housing continues to go up, that $5,000 is going to cover a little bit lesser and lesser percentage of their cost of attendance in subsequent years. Then there's also just financial aid package changes. So we've been talking a lot about aid, like gift aid being displaced, but other things can get displaced too. Work study can be displaced and so can loans. I also see sometimes at private colleges that there's something called a minimum student contribution. They might also have their own name for this, but it's when a college will have a financial requirement that all students, regardless of their income and funding, must pay out of pocket. A number that I've tended to see with this is somewhere between 1,500 and I think 3,000 was the highest I've ever seen. I want to give a visual of how scholarship displacement can be really harmful when a student is trying to pick a college and they don't know the institution's outside scholarship policy. So we have a fictitious student named Mary here, and Mary has gotten into 3 colleges. She's visited all 3 of them, and college B is the one that she likes the most. When she gets her financial aid award letters, she sees that she has some pretty large financial gaps at these schools. She's an outside scholarship that she knows she can take to any school she goes to, but she's able to decide she's not going to go to college C because she has way too big of a gap there. But she's looking at college B, even though that is the one that she would prefer to go to, she's going to have a lot smaller of a gap if she goes to college A. So based on the information that she has of her financial aid award letter and this outside scholarship that she knows she has, she ultimately decides to go to college A. This is where this can really hurt students when they're making that decision. Oh. So what she doesn't realize is that college A has an outside scholarship policy where they will take any outside scholarship and they will displace the institutional aid dollar for dollar for that amount. Because this wasn't posted on the website and Mary didn't receive any communication about this, she doesn't find out until she gets an unexpected bill after she has already committed to that school. So what happens here is that now Mary is already at college A. They have reduced her institutional aid dollar for her outside scholarship. And that ultimately leaves her with the same financial gap that she would have had at college B. But because she didn't have this information ahead of time, she made that decision to go to college A, and she can't reverse that decision now that she is already there. So I have been working in this space for the last 8 years, and I have to do a lot of searching for this information. And so I just wanted to put in keyword searches that I have used. If a college does have their outside scholarship policy, if you try the keyword searches that I have on this page, you will find it. I do want to flag that not all schools have this. I really think that they should, and I advocate for that, but it's not always the case. But if they do have it, you will likely be able to find that information with this. And if the outside scholarship policy is not available, you should be able to ask the financial aid office directly. I want to use an example of a college that does a really, really good job. So if you are looking at this presentation later, you can follow this link and go to the Duke University outside scholarships. They have a place where you can report your outside scholarship so that the college knows you have this. It also has a breakdown of different ways that your aid potentially could be displaced with real life examples. I think that they do a great job of this, and I wish that all colleges had this. So I just provided a lot of information about what can go wrong with scholarships. And so I just want to say scholarships are super important. They can make a really big difference in being able to afford college. So I don't want it to come across like I'm saying a student will just lose all of their scholarships and they shouldn't bother applying. That is absolutely not a takeaway I want you to take from today. Another common misconception is, well, a student should just not tell their university about their scholarship. So students are required to tell their universities about their outside scholarships. It's very likely that the college is going to find out anyway, and there can be some negative consequences for students if they do not report a scholarship and then a college finds out later that they do have an outside scholarship. Worst case scenario, the student could actually be required to pay money back to the university that maybe they don't have on hand. And another common misconception that we covered from earlier is that scholarships are not taxable. Because charity tends to not be taxable, this is something that is shocking, and I hope that eventually we can pass a law that the full cost of attendance should all be non-taxable. So here are some questions that you can have your students ask their outside scholarship providers to help with this with scholarship displacement. So one thing a student can ask is if they're getting a scholarship, a one-time scholarship, and they know that they're going to have a more generous package their freshman year, they can ask if they can defer it to their second or third year. Most scholarship providers, if they know that their scholarship will be displaced if they're sending it their first year, but the student will be able to benefit from it the second year, would not have a problem with this. Another question that students can ask, I actually got this tip from one of our college track students, and I thought it was really genius, is that she won so many scholarships that she actually asked if she could have her scholarship deferred to graduate school, and they said yes. So now she's able to decide if graduate school makes sense for her and her career trajectory instead of can she afford it. So I think that that is a great suggestion. Some scholarship providers are open to paying towards student loans, and this is a question that a student can ask. And then we talked earlier about those scholarships that earmark for only certain parts of the cost of attendance, like tuition and fees. If a student knows that they already have their tuition and fees covered, they should ask their scholarship provider if they can cover the full cost of attendance. And if it is a tax liability, and that is why the scholarship provider only wants to cover tuition and fees, the student should suggest having the scholarship cover all of their non-taxable items. So asking for it to cover their books and supplies or their required materials or their laptop. Another thing, we see students get a lot less financial aid to cover summer sessions. And so they can ask to have that scholarship money cover their summer session instead. That should then not count against money that they would be getting during the normal academic year. Another thing, if a student has a 529 set up, this is a great way that really minimizes scholarship displacement, is having the scholarship be paid directly into the student's 529. So if a student has an inaccurate cost of attendance, so with the inflation that we're having right now, and we're seeing rent go up and up, this is something that they can actually talk about with their financial aid office if they need their cost of attendance increased, which can open up the amount of money that they can receive. They can do this by bringing proof of increase of needs, so such as a lease or a course syllabus that might have really expensive supplies, or the cost if they have information about how much a laptop costs. And financial aid offices, we have successfully done this with our students, and it's done by a case-by-case basis. So here are some action steps for counselors or just anybody who's supporting students in this process, is that we don't want scholarship displacement to be something that they're finding out after they have already enrolled in college. So I think that it's really important to talk about scholarship displacement and financial need by junior year at the latest. Also, how the students gather all of, the advisor can gather outside scholarship policies of popular colleges. So for example, if there are some colleges that you tend to have students go to every year, see in those keyword searches I had in a couple slides back, if you can find the outside scholarship policies for those schools. Talking with parents about this and making sure that they have a plan B for in case a scholarship does get displaced, because we tend to think that scholarships are a guarantee, as they should be, but we know now that they're not. Students should also have a spreadsheet of all of their scholarships and list if they are merit or need-based, if there's any need-based component to it. Also, scheduling family affordability nights at 10th or 11th grade, again, to get these conversations out early so that people are able to start making different plans. I'd recommend having a one-pager about scholarship displacement. You are absolutely allowed to use any of my slides here in your one-pager, and inviting scholarships or financial aid professionals to come and actually talk to your school or your organization, either in person or virtually. Here are some exciting updates. We have some states that have actually banned this process. So that started with Maryland, then we had New Jersey. Last year was a very exciting year for California. AB 288 was passed into law. So we have the California ban on scholarship displacement, which impacts all of the institutions in California, both public and private. There are still 3 states that have bills, which is exciting. And if you want to see an continuously updated list, you can go to disscholar.org. They have a lot of great resources about scholarship displacement. And if you want to get involved, I have a list of 3 organizations, including NCCPC, who we are presenting with today, for ways that you can get involved. After this, I just have 2 templates that students can use to send to financial aid offices if they're unable to find outside scholarship policies and asking the school to present it to them. But this is the end of my presentation, and now we have time for some questions.
That was a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much, Nadja. Such great wisdom you've just shared with us. Folks, if you could please take a moment to use your Zoom reactions, or if you want to get on video, turn on your video to just share your appreciation. We do have a lot of great questions that have come in. So go ahead and feel free to start posting to the Padlet. Nadja was very generous to allow us a lot of time for Q&A, so take advantage of this opportunity. All right, Nadja, let's start with the first one. Because earlier I heard this too, you mentioned that it would be great to make scholarships non-taxable. Is there a policy or bill in the works here in California or anywhere?
I don't think so, but if anybody is hearing this information and just feeling really passionate about having this go forward, I would say starting with the National Scholarship Providers Association would be great. I do believe that that is something that they are looking into, and they have policy and advocacy teams there. But yeah, I think that this is something that I hope a lot of people are outraged about, because it really doesn't make sense to tax scholarships for students.
I really appreciate that, Nadja. And if what I'm doing is posting some of your answers into the Padlet. So folks, if we find that resource Nadja just mentioned from NASPA, we'll add it there as well. Next, do you have a sample scholarship spreadsheet, tool, or resource you'd be willing to share that they can use with their students?
I don't, but I could create one.
Nice. Thank you for your willingness to step up to be creative with us. We'll take that offline to the person who asked that question, and I'll follow up with Nadja about a resource either to be developed or if we find something else that's available. Next, should students be told about scholarship displacement when they get their scholarship?
I think so. I think what a really great practice at the university level would be to just have this information on the financial aid page. If there's anybody from a university that is looking to update their financial aid page and would like to talk to someone about it, I'd be happy to talk about ideas of how this information wouldn't be too much information, but just easy for students to find. I also think it would be really great to have this information on financial aid award letters. I do know that some colleges have started doing that, but it's not a standard practice. I think with outside scholarship providers, I'm a pretty active member at the NSPA. This is stuff that I've been working on for like the last 5 years. It is pretty complicated, and I think that sometimes even scholarship providers can get it wrong too. We really try our best, but we can also, like I was talking about my first year when I got those calls and I was completely caught off guard. I think that that happens to scholarship providers as well. So I do think that we all should work towards bringing more awareness to students, but I do see a lot of situations where students don't know about it ahead of time. I hope that answered your question.
It absolutely does. Thank you, especially for the different ways that we can get the information in front of students. And for those folks who may not be aware, the NCCPC has a policy committee, and we're very grateful for Nadja's specific participation on our policy work, especially around AB 288 scholarship displacement ban in California. And we are putting together a suite of resources that include tips, tricks, and tools for students as well as providers, and then later for campuses. So we'll be providing that in the near future. And related to that, someone asked, do you have a one-pager about scholarship displacement we can use with our families? And while you're thinking, if I'm just going to put in the link in the chat as well as in the Padlet, our coalition of supporters for AB 288 does have a web page. So that's in the chat, and it has a 2-minute video. It has easy to understand graphics and other resources, but I'll let Nadja respond about an actual handout or one pager.
I was going to recommend the NCCPC Hands Off My Scholarship, because I think that one it looks really good and it's easy to understand. And it's shareable.
Exactly. Absolutely. Thank you for that. And then it looks like we have a few more questions. So folks, keep them coming. The next one is, so is there nothing to worry about anymore for California schools, or are there still things regarding scholarship displacement to watch out for? And I think, Nadja, it'd be great if you can share a little bit about how really a lot of this impetus is still on our students.
Yeah, so the California ban is specifically for Pell recipients, and we are in the fall, we will be seeing the first year of this implementation. So I think myself and a lot of other scholarship providers and just people that work with students are kind of eagerly anticipating how this is going to play out. So I think it is important to pay really, really close attention to see what happens. There's still, with the ban on scholarship displacement, it doesn't change the requirement that students have to notify their colleges of their outside scholarship policy, because of those restrictions and those laws that they have to follow for the Title IV funding. Like, there's still requirements of over awarding that they have to follow. And Mayor, please add anything additional that you want added to that answer.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Nadja. I did just want to add a clarification that Pell recipients and California DREAM Act application financial aid eligible students are serviced by this bill. Thanks for that, Nadja. The next one is, do you know how the new changes for California scholarship displacement policy will affect students' financial aid? And I know you spoke about it just now, but if you want to go a little bit more into packaging.
Yes, so I think there is still a little bit of the unknown to just see exactly how that will change it. But my understanding is that the aid cannot be displaced now if the college has the information ahead of time, and their package should not change after that, especially for the gift aid. Mayor, is that correct?
I believe there's still some need to really document what the policies will look like and how campuses will tackle some of what Nadja described as what's in their control versus what is not. So I would like to just take this moment to say that there is a group of folks right now developing the exact language around how we can advise providers, students, as well as campuses. And that'll be available in the coming weeks. So if for those who registered for the series, you're going to get access to that. But I just wanted to note that the specific guidance we're going to offer is being developed right now. So I'm going to give our team some time to develop that and share it with the group publicly, if that's okay with everybody. Does that work for you, Nadja, in terms of that question? Yeah. Great. Wonderful. So the next question is, how do you suggest we balance a discussion of scholarship displacement with encouraging students to apply to scholarships, since to your point that this is the point of this is not to discourage, because we can still see families being discouraged?
That's a great question. And I've heard people feel very discouraged about this. That's why I think having this conversation early and just being sort of aware that this can happen. There are situations where, this is not going to be a problem. If a student wins, and these are not as common of scholarships, but if a student wins a full ride scholarship, it will not get displaced then. So if a student is winning an outside scholarship that is like a full merit scholarship and they don't need the money from the university, that is a situation where regardless of what your need, you can get money up to the full cost of attendance. I think what can be tricky is that, and that's why I think getting the policies maybe from the colleges, and then you can look at a real life example. So, I am in the Bay Area. Let's say we're looking at the outside scholarship policy for UC Berkeley, San Francisco State, and CSU East Bay. And then the students can actually see that in front of them. And I think having those spreadsheets too, what I was talking about, where if a student wins an outside scholarship, they should mark if it's going to be a merit scholarship or a need-based scholarship, and also can it go to any college? And so they can kind of start playing this sort of financial college Tetris in their head about where they could stack those scholarships together. But I think just kind of having them aware of it, and just continuously incorporating that into the conversation. And when we do figure out what their expected family contribution is, that's when the conversation will get really student specific about, okay, like if your family has an EFC of this, your need is going to look different than this other student, even though we all would potentially have the same cost of attendance if we're going to the same school.
Thank you, Nadja. And for folks, if I know we're getting into a lot of technical stuff at this point, so if any of this is still unclear, Nadja's wonderful and she wants to make sure that you understand any terms or any other processes that she has explained. So if anything, you want to follow up on any questions, please feel free to. Thank you, Nadja. Next, so if a student receives any Pell money or California Dream Act eligible funds, none of their school's aid can be displaced, or is it just their Pell Grant money that is safe from displacement? Anything you want to share about what is safe and what isn't safe to drive that point home?
So my understanding, and I hope this is correct, is that Pell is a first dollar scholarship and cannot be displaced. That is my understanding, and that is the experience that I've had with our students. I believe that to be true with all students. But I think that what still is true is about the over awarding. So if a student has a need that is less than the cost of attendance, their college, when packaging with Title IV funding, still can't award over that need. This, I think, is particularly hard to hear. In California, it's a very expensive state. The Bay Area, Los Angeles, these are very expensive areas. And so somebody might be low income regionally, but they are, if you look at the federal guidelines, they would not be eligible for Pell. They would have a very high EFC. This is something that is still a very big problem. And I think will continue to be a problem when we just look at a flat rate federal number and not take into account the differences in high cost of living areas. I know that that's not the greatest answer, but it's just something that we struggle with every year. College Track has multiple sites that are in really high cost of living areas, and it's something that we struggle with every year.
And I imagine that others do as well, Nadja. Thank you for that. And for those who have not already signed up to attend other webinars in our series, this morning we heard from the UC about their packaging and how the cost of attendance is set. We also heard from the CSU on Tuesday. So check out other folks who are scheduled next week, like the community colleges and the AICCU, who is over 80 of the independent nonprofit private institutions in California. All right, giving you your water break, Nadja. All right, how do, if students receive a scholarship that is not dispersed via the college, but directly as a check made out to the student, and they don't specify how it can be spent, do or should students still report this to the colleges? Or I guess another way to say it, is there any situation or circumstance in which a student should not have to report their scholarship as a follow-up to that?
Yeah, so I think that would probably be like, what are the situations that you don't have to report it to your school? Because I know some scholarship providers do pay money directly to the student, sort of in hope that this will not cause displacement. And so there's a risk with that. The student would be going kind of directly against something that the college is requiring them of. So there's always a risk with that, because the college does require that students report any outside aid. So this is the difference between a payment and a scholarship. So if you have, you know, a family member or a family friend that just wants to pay for your tuition and fees for the semester, that's just a payment. But once it becomes a scholarship and, you know, it's coming from an organization like a nonprofit or an outside scholarship provider, and it is a true scholarship, colleges do require students to report this. And so there's that risk if the student doesn't report this, that if the college finds out after the fact, I think I talked about this earlier, is that if a college finds out that a student is receiving scholarship money and not reporting it, in the worst case scenario, a college could actually require a student to pay back money that the college had given them. And if it's a student who doesn't necessarily have quick access to that money, that could be problematic. They could potentially be dropped from classes or not able to enroll in a future term. My understanding, but this is another thing where I want to say I'm not a tax professional and I don't want to give inaccurate information. I would say that for people that are sending out scholarships, to look into the regulations around emergency funding. That might be something where the student is not required to report it to the institution, because emergency fundings are things, they can sometimes fall outside of the purview of the cost of attendance. But I don't want to give inaccurate information. So I would say that that would be something good to look into, is needing to report emergency funding. I also think one of the other presenters is coming from the 529s, and this would be a great question to ask, is that if a scholarship provider pays the money directly into the student's 529 account, my understanding, but I would love for them to confirm, is that it does not impact the student's financial aid the same way as a scholarship being paid directly to the school would. I don't completely understand why, but I know that that's something that within the scholarship community, people have talked about over the years, about setting up 529s. There's a pretty popular scholarship called through the Dell Foundation. And I know that they actually set up all of their scholars with a 529 account.
Thank you so much for that, Nadja. And it looks like that could be our last question. So if folks want to take a moment to submit another question, now's a good time. I just wanted to take this moment to note that the Padlet is something you can access after today, in terms of not just the questions and answers, but also the resources. So the Hands Off My Scholarship webpage was added. The Discolored resource Nadja mentioned is added. Nadja and our past policy co-chair, Spada Viveros Walton, wrote a great article around scholarship displacement that was published in EdSource last year. That could be another great resource for you to deepen your understanding of this issue. And then again, stay tuned over the next few weeks for announcement about our free toolkits, just to deepen everybody's understanding about this and how to support our students. But while we wait to see if there's any last burning questions, Nadja, anything else you'd want to share around this issue, or any other insights?
Well, I just wanted to thank everybody for coming and for the questions. I think next year, if we do this presentation again, we'll be able to have even more updates, because we can say then in real time what happened in the first fall after this ban on scholarship displacement has happened in California. I think I'm also very eagerly anticipating how this will play out for students. And I know that this can feel quite daunting, but if anyone ever has questions in the future, please feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. I love talking about this. And I think that having students have more awareness of this makes it a lot easier to understand. It kind of just falls under that category of complicated financial aid. And that the more that you go over it, it does become easier to understand and explain to students, but it definitely feels a bit intimidating the first time.
Thanks for that, Nadja, and absolutely. And it is complex. There's a lot of things involved, and that's why we're working together with our colleagues in Southern California, the Southern California College Attainment Network, as well as Scholarship America, to develop these toolkits for y'all. Students will even have access to easy copy and paste email templates that they can send to their financial aid officers or to their providers. So stay tuned for that. Thank you so much, Nadja, for your time, talent, and treasure today. Really appreciate it. This was such a wonderful presentation. Last call, folks, for Zoom reactions to share with Nadja your appreciation for her time today. We don't see any other questions. we'll go ahead and pass it to the Zoom master to get us closed out. Thanks, Nadja.
Thank you so much, Mayor, and thank you to Nadja for your presentation on Hands Off My Scholarship, how to support students with displacement.
We want to thank all of our incredible presenters from across 10 partners who shared their gifts of time, talent, and treasure with us over the last 4 weeks from February 23 through March 16, 2023. Whether you attended one session or more, please complete our exit ticket and let us know how we can enhance these sessions and this series for future years. Thank you to our generous partners for providing our wonderful gifts for our series raffle. You can win one of 5 prizes, like a backpack filled with goodies from our steering committee member, MoneyThink, a $100 athletic gift card, or a Gap Bank swag bag. Don't forget to check out the rest of this YouTube playlist for more great content from our partners. Thank you again to our 10 partners from across the state of California: the University of California, the California State University, the California Community Colleges, the California Student Aid Commission, ScholarShare 529 and CalKids, AICCU, or the Association for Independent California Colleges and Universities, the California Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators, and Decided, powered by MoneyThink. We also want to give special thanks to our connector sponsor, the College Futures Foundation, and to all of our generous sponsors. This free 4-week webinar series is brought to you by the Northern California College Promise Coalition, our members, our sponsors, our partners, and more. We invite you to share this series with your colleagues, students, and families across California. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us.